This podcast contains content that is graphic in nature and mature language that may be unsuitable for children or young listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Starting in November 1978, law enforcement agencies all over the country started getting reports of robberies and theft, which intensified in number and violence over the next 3 years. It took the FBI Behavioral Science Unit to ultimately create a profile that would lead officers to finally track down and arrest the Ski Mask Rapist. Step inside with us into the mind of a serial rapist and, barring his arrest, likely future murderer on today's episode of Sin Law. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Sin Law. I'm Kelly.
And I'm Kyler.
And he's finally back, guys. It took a while. It did. It did.
You, maybe.
No, to everybody. I mean, like, you were on the bonus episode, but a full episode? Sure. Only like 3 people listened to the bonus episode. Anyway, I don't know.
It's 4.
Oh, 4. I'm sorry. 4.
Jeez.
Louise. All right, guys. It's been a minute. It's late at night, so keep your fingers crossed and hope I don't have to edit the ever-loving everything out of this after we get done. If you guys didn't listen to the bonus episode, I would actually recommend doing that now, because all of the housekeeping and stuff that normally comes before a podcast, I put it in a separate episode because I love you guys that much. And I'm also a podcast listener, so I get frustrated when I have to skip through 15 minutes of intro, but, you know, that's neither here nor there. So, are you ready? You're not ready. You're not ready. All right, so this one's going to be a little bit different than any of our other episodes. I can't really give you guys a centralized locale because, as you heard in the intro, this guy was all over the map for 3 years, and the reason that we're able to cover him on our podcast specifically is he is actually from Gina. Right here, you know, up a little bit north of us from right now. And we've actually talked about Gina a little bit before in LaSalle. Tullis, I think it was Dias and Sant.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, the double homicide where they left him in the pond, I think it was.
Yeah, yes. I
don't remember what episode that was. But anyway, so...
What was that? I don't remember. I know that we've used Sicily Island and was that the same one? Did he come from Gina? Mm-mm. That's because he came in.
No, he was up in Winsboro.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm. And then they went down to Homa, and I think he was in New Orleans when they... No, he was here. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Either way. The point of the story is that this man was originally from Louisiana. So, and some of his cases were actually, some of his, what the word I'm looking for? Assaults.
That one.
Yeah, that one. Some of those were in Louisiana as well. When I say there was cases all over the place, we're going from Florida all the way to California along the southern coast. And I say he was from Gina. I think that's the last place, or that's where his parents lived when he actually was arrested.
Southern coast?
Along the southern coast? What did I say?
You said southern coast.
Yeah, all along the southern coast.
Southern coast is Mexico and a Gulf.
Oh my God, okay, whatever. Louisiana, Texas, they both border
the Gulf.
And then all the way to California along the southern border of California.
All just California.
Okay, right. So he was.
I've just never heard the term the southern coast. It struck me as odd. Sorry.
So, intro. Ski Mask Rapist. His name is John Barry Simonis. And it may or may not sound familiar. The Ski Mask Rapist, anybody in true crime has heard that before. And it may or may not have been this one specifically, because there are actually a couple that they called the Ski Mask Rapist. Yeah, more than one.
Wow.
This one's famous for, because it lasted 3 years, and because as you'll see in the details here,
just from the fact that he was all over the place and
that 3 years long. Yeah. But also, as I said in the intro, the FBI Behavioral Science Unit, or actually I think it's the Behavioral Analysis Unit now, so it's the BAU. Anyway,
that sounds correct.
I'm not
entirely sure.
We'll get into it a lot more later, but this was one of their first group of interviews that they used to actually start that unit.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, because that's how they began the behavioral analysis unit, was because they used these people who would volunteer. I mean, they were already doing life sentences. They weren't going to get anything out of it, but if they were willing to talk, as most serial killers / serial rapist offenders, they're very narcissistic. So they love to tell their story. They love to brag about what they've done.
What
exactly.
I think.
So
you mean you're going to sit down and listen to what I think?
right, exactly. Well, because it's one of those things, they get off on it.
No, absolutely.
Especially for people who get away with it for a long time, they get that kind of
get to brag.
validation after the fact, yeah. So this guy, his family was living in Gina, I think, at the time of his arrest in Gina. He was originally from Lake Charles, so he was down there. And he committed numerous crimes all over the state of Louisiana. So, and that was, well, this was actually a listener recommendation. My mother gets her hair cut in Gina, and Miss Lenora actually told her about this case when my mom was telling Miss Lenora about our podcast. So
cool.
I had never heard of it. I did not realize he was from Louisiana. I mean, I say I haven't heard of it. I absolutely had heard of it, but I hadn't gone into the nitty-gritty of his specifics. And once I did get into it, I was blown away. It was one of those things, like, it made my entire, like, my eyes started crossing after a while, just because of
I've seen that happen.
all the things. So anyway, I actually ended up, because I needed to know more specifics, I actually bought a book. Now, this book was called A Killer by Design, and it was a wonderful resource for this case, and I'm going to reference it all the way through the whole entire podcast. So if I say the book that I got, that's the one. It's A Killer by Design by Ann Burgess. And she is an official bad bitch. Okay? Leaps and bounds ahead of her time in the field of specifically sexual criminal behavior. And at the point that she was a prominent figure, it was predominantly an area for men, dominated by men. So not only is she an author, not only is she a bad bitch, not only was she the basis for the inspiration behind the character for the Netflix's Mindhunter character, Dr. Wendy Carr. Oh yeah. She
that was a really good series too.
Yes. So she also is 100% of the time, first and foremost, a victim's advocate. So she helped the FBI develop the criminal profiling tools to, like I was talking about a minute ago, for the behavioral analysis unit, and all of the bad bitch things that she did with them. But her life's work has focused on developing ways to assess and treat trauma in rape victims. So she's actually a professor currently at William F. Connell School of Nursing at Boston College. So, I mean, just all across the board, bad bitch, like insanely intelligent and glass ceiling shattering. So,
Nice.
All right, so in the novel, according to Ann, Simonis was an all-state Louisiana high school quarterback. He had served in the Army from 1973 to 1977. He had a full-scale IQ of a 128, and he maintained an athletic build. He had an abusive upbringing, and it was believed that he had actually witnessed his father committing sexual acts on his sister, and he clearly had a deep anger toward women from childhood because his assaults intended to degrade, demean, and humiliate his victims. So he was what Anne actually called a, quote, vindictive rapist, unquote. And at around age 15, he began his peeping Tom phase that continued until he started actually breaking into the people's house into which he was peeping. By about age 24, Simonis had joined the army and was stationed in London, where he began flashing women at random, repeatedly. Just running out, flashing his bare nude front, and then, enjoying the thoughts of doing that in full frontal, yes.
I mean, I had assumed that he, clothed and would... That's slightly impressive, actually, that he would completely naked.
But anyway, so he did that for a period of 3 to 4 years. And then when he got back to the States, I mean, like, he never got in trouble while he was over there, apparently, according to Miss Ann's novel. Now, when he got back to the States, he started working as a cardiologist specialist or a lab tech. And he had, I think, one arrest in 1978, and that was for making indecent phone calls. And that was in Lake Charles, Louisiana. Yeah, so that was the only arrest up until that point. And his first assault actually occurred in November of 1978. And according to his interview that he did with 2 of the information gatherers, it was a big interview that they did. I think it was over 3 or 4 hours long. And that was an interview, and if you're looking for it, and I'll have it in the show notes, but it's the interview with Roy Hazelwood and Ken Lanning at Angola State Penitentiary. And he told them that his first assault in November of 78 actually started out as a burglary, and when he confronted the woman he'd followed home from a store earlier that day, he took her money, and then he decided to bind her hands, and then he attempted to sexually assault her, but was unable to get an erection because of his nervousness. Now, over the next 3 years, from 78 to 81, he would, by his own admission, commit between 45 and 50 rapes. Actual sexual assaults probably would get a little higher, and this is a direct quote, anywhere between 60 and 75. And that was until he was arrested in November of 1981. So he kept it very timeline straight.
In how short of a time span?
3 years.
Okay.
Okay. And in the novel by Ann, she just...
though.
Yeah. And for it to have taken as long as it did for him to get caught. But there's reasons, so let's get...
aren't there always?
Yeah, so the way that Miss Ann actually got brought into this, the FBI agent who called her was asking for her help. He only gave her... When he brought it to her, he only gave her descriptions of the first 5 attacks, the middle 5 attacks, and the last 5 attacks, just to keep it kind of, limited, because at that point, well, no, not keep it interesting, but he had to give her a sample of the first 5, the middle 5, and the last 5, because at that point, they were worried about his escalation, because he was tending to be more violent, and they were worried they weren't going to catch him before he had graduated to murder.
Right.
So... But in the vein of keeping things in a measurable, because they needed it quickly, so they couldn't give her all of the cases, so they gave her a sample of the first, the middle, and the last 5. And that was just to show the progression of the violence. And trigger warning for anybody, we're about to discuss sexual assault, including rape, and if that's triggering, you might want to skip ahead a good bit, because... that's just what we're about to get into. You probably shouldn't listen to this episode at all, in general. And I probably should put that at the very beginning, but I'm saying it again now. So, here we go. The first 5 assaults were described as run-of-the-mill. They were surprise attacks, a single woman alone in her home. He promised them that they wouldn't get hurt, and then he would vaginally rape them. The middle 5, he starts using handcuffs and other bindings, and he becomes more aggressive, forcing anal and oral penetration, sometimes in front of family members, and sometimes more than one woman during the same attack.
Damn.
So the last 5... and imagining it getting worse from here, it showed a much higher level of aggression. For example, Simonis, well, they didn't know him at the time, but he had beaten a woman in the chest so severely that she ended up having a mastectomy due to the trauma he caused to her breast by beating on her. So just imagine, because you have to think about that in a way, like he so severely maimed her breasts that they had to be removed.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. So, rapes and robberies. Simonis would later claim that it was almost always firstly a robbery / burglary, that he picked his targets mostly based on affluence and how much he thought he could get from them. Second was on the looks of the woman, since a pretty wife gets pretty things, so her husband can keep her happy. That's literally what he said. If they were a pretty wife, then that's how they got their husband to get them pretty things. Yeah. So, first assault occurrence was in November of 78, and they ended with his arrest on November of 81. Like I said, I thought it was pretty interesting that he kept his timeline, like, matching in the months. I don't know if he did it on purpose. I highly doubt it, but it was still pretty interesting. Now, a couple of the things that made him harder to pin down, we're going to get into now. He would constantly change his clothing. What he stole when he burglarized from the victims, and then he would go from Florida to Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma, and California just to keep police off his trail. He says, quote, yes.
I've been everywhere, man. Oh, wait, wrong quote.
Quote, yes, I put about 80,000 miles on it in 10 months, unquote, speaking about his bright red 81 Pontiac Trans Am that eventually became his downfall. So, when they asked him in this interview that I referenced earlier at the Angola Penitentiary, he was asked how much money in all that he had made in the thefts. He stated that if he was fencing it, it was close to $250,000. And then in retail, it was probably closer to 3 or 4. And this was in the 80s and over a 3-year period.
Jesus.
I did not do the conversion, so. Now, solid quote. It got to be a cat and mouse game with the police. I knew they were after me by 1980. From there, I figured that if I kept on going, I could just not create a definitive pattern. I had to stagger my attacks and my robberies in different states, always change my clothing, have new stuff after every job, throw the old stuff away, never kept any evidence, unquote. Now, that just shows you the
level of forethought and actual consideration. And
absolutely. Like, he was absolutely consciously aware that, especially at the point that he knew that they were onto him, that he put extra effort into trying to make sure that he wasn't going to get caught.
Which is completely different from a lot of these type of people, or I would more say this genre of
offender.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, especially like rapist types. Like burglary rapists.
More caught up in what they're doing and the fact that they're doing it than they are in what they're doing next and how they're going to get away with it.
Right. Absolutely agree. Simonis claimed that his, initial motivator was always the burglary or the robbery or the theft, which is not usually in the cases of rape and sexual assault. That's for the sexual thrill of it, for the pleasure of that. So Miss Ann actually doesn't entirely think that he's being truthful when he says that it was the burglary was the primary cause, but we'll get into that. So after he got back from the Army, like I said, he was working at a hospital as a technician, so cardiac technician, so we would do like the EKGs and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. He admitted he used that position to his advantage in planning his attacks.
Never have guessed.
No, listen to this. Saying, quote, I'd go down and have a copy made and return the original and copy down their addresses and later on use that to get into their house, unquote. So not even just like taking advantage of them in a medical setting, like he was taking full advantage of the fact that he had privileged information from patients to be able.
Smart man.
I'm telling you.
All I was thinking was like taking advantage of anesthesiologists.
Right. But it's a scary thought to think that, people like that could do the same thing. Like, it's terrifying because you trust people in hospitals and settings and places like that to keep your information privileged because it's supposed to be law. So now.
Privileged. He is privileged.
When I mentioned the red Trans Am, Ann states in her book that part of their behavioral profile that got released to all of the law enforcement officers involved as part of the BOLO, part of that profile actually included a, quote, flashy car. And it was because of that information that an officer noticed and noted this bright red Trans Am and was able to later connect that sighting to a nearby attack on a house of women who said their car had been stolen. And when that same officer returned to where he had seen the car, the Trans Am, the victims of that attack, their car was now parked in the place where that red Trans Am had been. Yes. So when he noticed that, he immediately, got out, and he recovered some
Seems fishy here.
gloves that were he found those at the scene, and he probably wouldn't have, but the victims at the house where they had been attacked mentioned specifically these type of gloves. And so as soon as he saw those, he knew they were evidence, bagged them, tagged them. And then the investigators issued another bolo specifically for the bright red Trans Am. And when they got a report of the correct one, with because I'm sure there was more than one in the area at the time, because this was Lake Charles. So I mean, down in that area, there had to have been at least more than one. In the 80s, maybe not many, but still. So they called in the plate. The plate on this specific one came back to John Barry Simonis. So he was later arrested that same day in Lake Charles. It was about a week before Thanksgiving, and he was coming out of a convenience store, and odd combination, he was carrying a loaf of bread and 2 packs of cigarettes. So they were only out of those 2 things, apparently. He was, he said that although he had no chance of ever legally walking free of Angola, he was glad, in a way, to have been stopped when he was, because, quote, rape, he said, was beginning to bore him. And that was at about the time that Lieutenant Milan arrested him outside the Lake Charles convenience store, and that his fantasies at that point were increasing to... It's starting to fantasize more about murder and not so much the thrill of the rape and the assault.
He was, so to speak, chasing the dragon.
Yeah, absolutely. And now Ann says that in all of these attacks, blanket, the main appeal for Simonis was the control.
What a surprise.
And like I said at the beginning, he loved to talk. I mean, I can't tell you, he would literally he would agree to any interview that anybody wanted. He would sit and talk for hours and hours and hours and hours. He didn't mind being recorded, and he would talk to multiple agencies over the next few months. So, after his arrest, 30-year-old John B. Simonis gave full confessions to 81 attacks in 12 states.
Good Lord.
Pled guilty at 4 different trials, and that includes the December 4th trial in 1981 in LaSalle Parish. And I actually made a note in my note about the episode. It was episode 8. I thought it was 7, but I was wrong. So, and he pled guilty to 2 counts of armed robbery of a Gina, Louisiana home, 1 count of burglary, and 1 unauthorized use of a vehicle. And he...
Oh, yeah, that mean old baby. Unauthorized use of a vehicle.
For that case alone, he was sentenced to 231 years in prison. Armed robbery can get you a serious amount. I'm pretty sure it's 160. If they charged him the maximum penalty, I think it's 80 years. So if you get both of those max penalty, it's 160. And then the burglary and unauthorized use of a vehicle. So it depends on how much you burgle. So some good came from these many confessions, actually. And I hate to give anybody, especially someone as vile as this man, because the amount of trauma is immeasurable. You can't ever give these women back what they lost in his many attacks. But
virginity, boobs.
They actually helped these confessions, because like I said, he made many of them. He confessed to crimes, like I said, in 8-9 different states.
I always worry about the ones that confessed to XYZ amount of fucking
No, I agree with that too. Yeah.
Do you remember the one in I think it was Jacksonville, where they confessed to crimes all across I'm pretty sure it was all across the country. If not,
well, it's always
not
a concern.
Just a few states, but some of them were. They had been watching a manhunt on television recently, and had been giving information from that to try
and that's one of the things that I know a lot of officers will do. They will make a point to find. That's why in almost all investigations ever, they are going to keep something specific about the crime to themselves that does not ever leave the privilege of just the people who were there at the scene that will ever know. Because they want to be able to weed out those people. They want to be able to say, well, that all's been in the newspaper. Give me something that hasn't. And Simonis, in his case, he had all of the specifics. And, again, he was a very intelligent man. So, anyway, the only good that anybody can get out of this, though, came from him actually helping and freeing other wrongfully accused and imprisoned men. So there was one gentleman, his name was Clarence Williams. He was 42 years old. He was in Texas. He was imprisoned in Texas, and he was freed after Simonis confessed to an attack that happened in 1979, April 30th. It was a sexual attack on a 40-year-old Bridge City woman and her teenage son and daughter that Williams had been found guilty of and was serving a 50-year prison sentence. And again, this man, already in jail, already found guilty by a jury, 50-year prison sentence. Simonis confessed. His confession was accepted, and the man was released from prison. Another one in Ohio, Bradley Cox, his judge demanded nothing less than a videotaped confession before he would use Simonis' confession as evidence to grant Cox a new trial. Cox had been sentenced to 56 to 200 years for the 3 rapes he had been found guilty of. But Simonis came through, and he did repeat his confession on videotape, which was allowed, and eventually was the cause for Cox's eventual release. I think, if I remember correctly, in that case, once they got the videotape confession, the judge ordered a retrial, and then the DA refused to try him again. So when all was said and done, the UPI article that I'll mention in the show notes from December 23rd, 1981, reported that John B. Simonis was sentenced to 18 life terms plus 2,406 years. But his recollection at his interview with Hazelwood and Lanning was a little bit different. He said, quote, "I'm not sure I remember them all. I have about 21 life sentences plus an additional 2,386 and a half years to go."
The majority of rapists got that amount of time.
Right. And in the same article from December 23rd, his mother claimed that he is confessing to things he didn't do to save his family the pain of a new trial. That, quote, "he is caring and likes children. They should remember something like that. That something like that could happen to their family." Honey, mama, it did. He traumatized at least 80 different families. And even if they were in the same family, that's
almost worse.
Yes, everybody was a child once. Everybody has a family. Everybody has a father and a mother, and they were all a child at one point. But after a certain age, mama, you got to understand. You got to let it go. This is irredeemable. You can't come back from this. Okay, and his mom actually had to end up quitting her job and change her phone number because of the harassing and crank calls, according to that article. So, and that's pretty much all of that I have. Like this case is absolutely wild. I've never heard of anybody having 18 life sentences plus another 2,500 years. Right. And I like you were saying earlier, I do know that some men on like death row and things like that will throw out random confessions trying to get other people out of trouble or whatnot. But we're the police on this side of things, at least, I don't know how they were back in 1980, but it sounds like they were trying to get better. Right. And there are some people in some cases.
Always refreshing.
Well, absolutely, but he even admitted many times over in his interview. I've got the link for that in the show notes. His interview was wild. You can feel his cockiness dripping off the page, because every single thing that he says it like he's talking to people who have barely begun to speak English. Like he's speaking in a very superior, very
he's speaking to people that he's just eluded for 3 years.
No, I get that too. But I just thought it was the funniest thing, because it always cracks me up when it's the smallest little detail of he's going to drive a flashy car. That was the detail that was included in this behavior report. Not what kind, not what color, not anything, nothing specific. But this guy's going to drive a flashy car. That was it. And that got this cop's radar up enough to be like, oh, that's a nice red Trans Am. Huh. And then when there was an attack,
that's great,
very close by. Just major props to this guy.
I was about to say that's damn good police work.
Right, and that's the kind of people you want to have.
Follow your hunches and actually pay attention to reports and follow up, dig,
and just pay attention.
Pavement,
Yeah, for sure.
Hell yeah, go you.
So this case was just absolutely wild, though. Like I said, I paid for it's funny because the book by Ann Burgess, she wrote A Killer by Design, and John B. Simonis has just one chapter of that. She talks about all the other serial killers that they did the interviews with. Like I said, she helped create that entire unit with the studies and things that she did, and furthering that investigative tool that they used to create. And her focus was mainly on, like I said, the sexual assaults and the rapes and the things like that. That was her main focus, and she's just a wonderful advocate and leader of women's rights and the ability to heal after such a traumatic event. So there's no amount of thanks that we can do for women warriors like that. So as of right now, John Barry Simonis, the Ski Mask Rapist, is 72 years old. He maintains his permanent address and forever home at the Angola State Penitentiary. And I'm sure...
I think you're so funny.
I think I am. So I'm sure that if anybody wanted to have a chat with him, I'm sure he'd still be willing to talk to you.
I'm not sure that he would remember quite as much.
I don't know.
He was already getting spotty.
I don't know.
Now, because I've known quite a few that were almost like that, but more along the lines of they could tell you everything that happened verbatim for the first 45 years of their life, and then the last 30 or so.
Yeah, well, that's the degenerative stuff. But yeah, check the source material if you want to go see. You go read through his interview. I've got a link for that on there. I've also got links to different articles, and also again, I've put the title and the spelling of the author's name and everything down there at the bottom, so if you guys want to check that book out. It was a great read, not just for this case, but for others as well. But this was the only one for Louisiana that had any kind of relative connection. And like I said, he actually got caught in Louisiana. He lived here, and again, crazy bananas. I had no idea. And when it was referred to my mom, she actually came home and told me he was a ski mask rapist turned killer, but he never killed anybody. He never got to that point.
Close.
But if he had made it any further, it wouldn't have been one or two, if that many, before he was actually to the point of actual murder. Now, thank you so much, Miss Lenora, for recommending this one for us. And we appreciate you listening, guys. We appreciate you coming back and hanging out with us every other week or so.
I apologize. I don't know if it's noticeable, or I'm assuming it is, or how noticeable it is. I've been stuffed up and stopped up for the past day and a half, 2 days.
Our whole house has,
I feel like
though.
my entire face is one whole cotton ball.
Yeah.
Or mucus ball.
Our whole house is. But I mean, when you have the weather that goes from like 40 freaking degrees all the way up to 80 degrees in the same 18-hour period, and then back and forth, like it's just nobody's face can deal with that. Okay. Having to turn on your heater and the air conditioner in the same 12-hour time span is ridiculous. I'm just saying.
You're not wrong.
It's ridiculous. If I have to check and make sure that it's on the heater before I go to bed because it's on the air conditioner when we're getting ready for bed, it's a little bit ridiculous. I'm just saying. Thank you guys so much for listening. Case suggestions, anything like that. Oh, real quick, if you didn't listen to the bonus episode and you don't plan to, we have all of our episodes are now directly streamed to YouTube. I have a TikTok account. I have an Twitter/X account. I also post things to my TikTok regularly. I try to post at least twice a week on there, especially if I'm coming out with an episode or if something interesting comes across my phone. There have been a lot of different things popping up all around our area. A lot of crazy stuff that I'm really looking forward to being able to cover on here. And then I think that's it. I think that's everything. But you check those out. You can always leave a case suggestion or anything like that in any of those comment sections on the YouTube, on the TikTok, on the X. You can do any of the private messaging to any of them. And you also can get in contact with us by our email, which is sinlawpodcast@gmail.com. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please, if you can take a minute to give us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever, if you're allowed. Really appreciate it. But all right, guys, y'all have a wonderful week, and let us know what you think on any of those platforms. I've got them in the show notes as well. And I look forward to seeing you on the next bonus episode, or if not, then the next full episode here in 2 weeks. Take care out there.
See y'all next time.
This has been an Elf Audio production.